Hey guys, tonight we're easing into a world where warmth is a luxury. Stone is a personality trait and you probably won't survive this. Not because of battle, but because of the cold. Before we go any further, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, tell me where you're listening from tonight and what time it is for you right now. Medieval midnight? Early morning chill? Somewhere in between. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing just inside a medieval castle, and the first thing you notice isn't the grandeur, it's the temperature. The cold presses in immediately, wrapping around your ankles and climbing upward like it knows exactly where to settle. The stone beneath your feet has been holding on to winter for months, and it has no intention of letting go. Castles don't greet you with warmth, they test you. They ask how badly you want to stay. This is where knights live, train, sleep, and endure. Not in gleaming halls like the movies promise, but in vast, echoing spaces that feel more like caves than homes. The walls are thick, sometimes over 10 feet, but that thickness is for arrows and siege engines, not insulation. Stone absorbs cold efficiently and releases it slowly, meaning even when summer arrives, winter still lingers deep inside the walls. A historical fact worth settling into right away. Medieval builders understood defence far better than thermodynamics. Comfort was optional. Survival was not. You walk forward, your breath faintly visible. There's a smell in the air, smoke that never quite escapes. Damp wool, old wood, and something animal. That's normal. Castles are living organisms constantly inhaling and exhaling through cracks, arrow slits, and ill-fitting doors. Those narrow windows that look so dramatic from the outside, they're wind tunnels in winter. Every breeze finds its way in, carrying frost with it. A quirky detail most people don't expect. Some castles were actually colder inside than outside on certain days. When the sun briefly warms the open air but never reaches the interior stone, stepping indoors can feel like walking into a refrigerated cellar. Knights joke about it, but only because complaining doesn't make it warmer. You're wearing layers, because everyone does. Even now as you imagine this, picture wool on your skin. Not soft modern wool, but thick scratchy fabric that smells faintly of sheep and smoke. Linen underneath helps wick moisture, because sweat in winter is dangerous. If you sweat and then stop moving, the cold bites harder. Knights know this instinctively, even if they don't explain it scientifically. This lived knowledge passes from older men to younger ones, from veterans to squires, quietly, without ceremony. There's a debate historians still circle around in hushed academic tones. Did medieval people actually feel the cold less than we do today? Some argue that constant exposure hardened them, both physically and psychologically. Others insist the complaints in letters and chronicles prove they suffered just as much, if not more, without modern heating. You can almost hear those arguments echoing off the stone as you stand here, shivering, wondering which side you'd fall on. The castle is quiet right now, but not silent. Somewhere deeper inside there's the low murmur of voices, the crackle of a fire struggling to justify its existence, the clink of metal being set down. Fire exists here, yes, but it's precious, localized, and never enough. You'll learn soon that medieval warmth comes in pockets, not blankets. You move from one tolerable space to another, memorizing where heat lives and where it absolutely does not. You pause near a wall and feel it with your hand. It's damp. Moisture seeps through stone over time, especially in northern Europe, and damp cold is the worst kind. It seeps into joints, into bones, into moods. Medieval medical theory, based on humours, claims cold and damp create imbalance, leading to illness. And while their explanations differ from modern science, their observations aren't wrong. Cold weakens, it slows you down, it makes everything harder. Yet castles endure, and so do the people inside them. That endurance becomes a kind of identity. Knights aren't just warriors, they're specialists in discomfort. Training doesn't end when the swords are put away. Enduring cold nights, numb fingers, and restless sleep is part of the unspoken curriculum. If you can handle this, you can handle a battlefield at dawn. As you walk further in, you start to understand something important. Warmth here is social. You don't get it alone. You find it near others, near animals, near kitchens and crowded rooms. Solitude is cold. Community is survival. That's not a metaphor, it's practical advice. And this is only the beginning. You haven't even reached the Great Hall yet, where fires roar dramatically and still fail to warm the corners. You haven't lain down on a straw mattress, listening to wind claw at wooden shutters. You haven't stood watch on a frozen wall, wondering how long your toes can last before they go numb. But you will. For now, you stand at the threshold, letting the cold settle into you, realizing that every trick, every habit, every strange medieval choice you're about to witness is shaped by this one enemy. Not dragons, not rival lords, winter. And as you take one more step forward into the stone heart of the castle, you begin to understand how nights stayed warm, not by defeating the cold, but by negotiating with it every single day. You don't fight the cold head-on here, you layer against it. That becomes clear the moment you watch a knight dress for the day, not with armour first, but with fabric, long before steel ever touches your skin, wool does, and lots of it. You start with a linen undertunic, thin but vital. Linen sits closest to your body because it breathes, pulling moisture away from your skin. Sweat is the silent enemy in winter. A historical fact worth anchoring here. Medieval people understood through experience that dampness led to sickness. They didn't talk about bacteria, but they knew cold plus wet meant trouble. Linen helps keep you dry, even when you're moving, training or hauling firewood across a courtyard glazed with frost. Over that comes wool, not one layer, several. Wool is heavy, sometimes itchy, often unevenly spun, but it's a miracle material in this world. It traps air, keeps heat even when damp, and lasts forever. Knights wear wool tunics, hose, cloaks, hoods, and sometimes quilted garments padded with scrap fabric or animal hair. You can feel the weight of it pulling on your shoulders, grounding you. It's not comfortable exactly, but it's reassuring. A quirky detail most people don't expect. Colour matters. Darker dyes, deep reds, browns, blues, are prized in winter because they absorb more heat from firelight and the rare sun. Bright white looks noble, sure, but it reflects warmth away. Fashion bows to physics, even if no one calls it that. You notice how everything overlaps. Gaps are dangerous. A draft finding its way under a tunic or down a sleeve can turn your whole body cold in minutes. Belts cinch layers tight. Cloaks wrap around like portable walls. Hoods are pulled low, not for drama, but because heat escapes from the head faster than anywhere else. Knights may not know the percentage, but they know the feeling. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about whether knights wore padded armour, gambesons, as everyday winter wear. Some argue these thick quilted garments were too valuable and reserved for combat training. Others suggest they doubled as some of the warmest clothing available, and were worn whenever possible. Standing here, wrapped in wool, you suspect the truth is practical. If it's cold enough, and you're allowed to, you wear whatever keeps you warm. Hands are another problem. Gloves exist, but fine motor control matters. You can't tie knots, clean weapons, or eat properly with bulky mitts, so fingers go numb. Knights shove their hands under their arms into pockets or against warm bodies, human or animal, whenever dignity allows. Pride loses to frostbite very quickly. Footwear is no better. Leather boots with woolen hose inside, sometimes lined with fur if you're wealthy. Straw can be stuffed in as insulation, replaced when it gets wet or crushed. It's not elegant, but it works for a while. You learn to keep moving, stamping feet, shifting weight. Stillness is cold's greatest ally. What surprises you most is how rarely armour is worn in winter unless absolutely necessary. Metal drains heat brutally. Put on chainmail in freezing weather, and you can feel the warmth leave your body almost instantly. There's a fringe historical anecdote that some knights warmed their mail by the fire before wearing it. Dangerous, smoky and uncomfortable, but preferable to strapping ice directly to your torso. Whether this was common or exceptional is debated, but the idea itself tells you everything about how unforgiving metal can be. You also notice the social hierarchy stitched into clothing. Furs, squirrel, fox, marten, line collars and cloaks for those who can afford them. Laws in some regions restrict who can wear which furs, because warmth is status. Staying comfortable is power. The colder you are, the lower you tend to be on the ladder. As you move through the castle, you start recognising people by sound before sight. The soft rasp of wool brushing wool, the heavy thud of layered bodies moving through narrow corridors. Everyone smells faintly the same: smoke, fabric, human. Clothes are rarely washed in winter. Drying them is too difficult and wet garments can kill. Cleanliness yields to survival. By now, you understand something essential. Knights don't stay warm by heating castles. They stay warm by carrying their warmth with them. The clothing is the hearth. The layers are the walls. And as you pull your cloak tighter and follow them deeper inside, you realise this is only preparation. Fabric helps, yes. But the real battle is waiting in the vast spaces ahead, where even the best wool feels small against all that stone. The great hall waits for you like a promise it can't quite keep. From the doorway it looks warm, inviting even. Firelight flickers across timbered beams, long tables, banners hanging heavy against the walls. This is the heart of the castle, the place where knights gather, eat, argue, and listen to orders. If anywhere should feel comfortable, it's here. You step inside and the illusion starts to fade. Yes, there's a fire, sometimes several, but the hall is enormous. The ceiling climbs high above you, swallowing heat as fast as the flames can produce it. Warm air rises, pooling uselessly near rafters no one can reach, while you remain ankle-deep in cold. A solid historical fact anchors this moment. Medieval great halls were designed for visibility, ceremony, and smoke dispersal, not heat retention. Comfort never made the blueprint. The fire crackles loudly, more for morale than effectiveness. You drift closer and feel the difference immediately. 2 steps back, and it's gone. Warmth here has borders, invisible but strict. People cluster at the edges of these heat islands, rotating slowly like meat on a spit, trying to warm fronts and backs in turn. You learn quickly not to claim a spot and stand still too long. Someone colder will eventually nudge you aside, and they'll be right to do so. A quirky detail most people miss. The floor is often strewn with rushes, reeds mixed with herbs. They smell faintly sweet and help absorb moisture, but they also insulate just a little, breaking the direct contact between frozen stone and boots. Over time, they become filthy, replaced only occasionally. Warmth, hygiene, and scent exist in a constant, uneasy negotiation. Smoke never fully leaves. Chimneys are wide and inefficient, and many halls rely on louvered openings in the roof. On calm days, smoke rises. On windy ones, it pushes back down, filling the hall with a haze that stings your eyes and coats your throat. It's unpleasant, but smoke has an upside. It discourages insects and preserves timber. Some scholars argue people tolerated smoky halls because the benefits outweighed the discomfort. Others think there simply wasn't a better option. Standing here, blinking into the firelight, you suspect it's both. The seating tells its own story about warmth. The Lord's table is often raised and placed closer to the fire, sometimes with tapestries behind it to block drafts. Lower-ranking knights sit farther away in colder air. Power once again is measured in degrees. The difference isn't dramatic, but it's enough to matter over the long evenings. You listen as the hall fills with sound, boots, voices, laughter that feels slightly forced. Noise itself becomes a kind of warmth. Silence makes the cold louder. When people talk, tell stories, or sing, the hall feels less hostile, even if the temperature doesn't actually change. There's an open debate among historians about how much communal living affected perceptions of cold. Did shared spaces make the chill more bearable psychologically, or did people simply have no alternative? The answer drifts somewhere between necessity and coping. Food arrives, steaming briefly before cooling fast. Bowls are cradled in hands as much for warmth as for eating. Hot pottage, thick bread, roasted meat. Calories are heat. Knights know winter is not the time for restraint. You eat more when it's cold because your body demands it, and medieval diets reflect that instinct clearly. Despite the fire and the crowd, you notice the hall never truly relaxes. Cloaks stay on, hoods remain up. People don't sprawl. Everyone is slightly hunched, conserving heat. The architecture enforces this posture, reminding you that this is not a living room, it's a fortress that occasionally allows comfort to visit. As the evening wears on, the fire burns lower. Wood is precious, especially in winter. Someone will decide when enough is enough, and the flames will be banked, not fed. The cold begins creeping back immediately, reclaiming the space inch by inch. Conversations shorten. People drift away, seeking smaller rooms, closer quarters, anywhere the cold has less room to stretch. You leave the Great Hall with a clearer understanding. It's the social centre of castle life, yes, but not a refuge from winter. It offers warmth in theory, in symbolism, in fleeting moments by the fire. In practice, it teaches you something important. Scale is the enemy of heat. And as you pass back into narrower corridors where stone presses closer and ceilings lower, you feel a strange relief. The hall may be grand, but when it comes to surviving the cold, smaller feels safer. You'd think fireplaces would solve everything. After all, when you imagine medieval warmth, you picture roaring hearths, flames tall enough to fight winter itself. And castles do have fireplaces, huge ones, built into walls like stone mouths forever chewing on wood. But as you spend time near them, you realise they're impressive in scale and disappointing in effect. You stand before one now. It's wide enough to walk into, the mantle blackened with centuries of soot. The fire inside crackles and pops, sending sparks upward into a throat of stone that leads to the sky. A historical fact settles in quietly. Most medieval fireplaces were designed primarily to vent smoke, not to radiate heat efficiently. The idea of trapping and circulating warmth comes much later. You inch closer and feel the familiar pattern. Your face warms, your hands thaw, your back stays cold. Take a step sideways, and the heat vanishes entirely. Fireplaces heat people, not rooms. The stone around them absorbs much of the warmth, hoarding it slowly, then releasing it long after the fire has died down, often when no one is around to enjoy it. A quirky, almost frustrating detail. Many castle fireplaces are built into exterior walls. This makes construction easier and smoke management simpler, but it also means half the heat goes straight outdoors. You're essentially warming the countryside. No one at the time seems particularly bothered by this because alternatives are rare and experimentation is risky. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about whether medieval people even expected fireplaces to warm entire rooms. Some historians argue that the hearth was never meant to do that. It was a focal point, a place to cook, gather, and symbolise hospitality. Expecting it to heat stone chambers may be a modern projection. Others counter that written complaints about cold interiors suggest disappointment was very real. Standing here, rotating slowly in front of the flames like everyone else, you suspect expectations were low and reality still fell short. You notice how fireplaces shape behaviour. Furniture crowds close, arranged in semicircles that maximise exposure. Benches have high backs to block drafts. Sometimes screens, wooden or fabric, are placed near the fire to reflect heat inward. These are small innovations, but they matter. Medieval warmth is incremental. You take what you can get. Fuel is always on people's minds. Wood must be hauled, chopped, dried, and guarded. In winter, forests are harder to access, and wet wood burns poorly. Some castles supplement with peat or charcoal, each with its own smell and temperament. A fringe fact whispered in historical margins. In desperate times, dried animal dung is burned, especially in regions with scarce timber. It smells awful, but it produces steady heat. Survival has a strong nose. Fireplaces also bring danger. Sparks leap out, chimneys clog, smoke builds. Fires can smoulder unnoticed inside walls. There's always someone assigned to watch the hearth, especially at night. Warmth here is never passive. It demands attention and respect. You start to understand why castles are full of tapestries and hangings, even near open flames. They're risky, yes, but necessary. Bare stone steals heat mercilessly. Fabric slows that theft. It's a gamble people take because the alternative is worse. Some scholars argue that fear of fire limited how much insulation people used. Others think cold pushed them to accept the risk. The truth likely shifted with the temperature. As the fire burns lower, you feel the cold reclaim its territory. The hearth doesn't fight back. It just shrinks, leaving you once again negotiating for position. Eventually you step away. knowing there's no victory to be found here, only temporary truces. Fireplaces, you realise, are symbols of warmth more than solutions. They offer comfort in moments, not mastery over winter. They teach patience, movement, and humility. You don't conquer the cold with fire in a medieval castle. You visit warmth briefly, then move on. And as you leave the hearth behind, hands warmer than before, but feet already numb again, you start looking for other tricks, other ways people here bend just slightly, so winter doesn't break them. The walls are watching you. That sounds dramatic, but as you walk these corridors, you begin to understand why medieval people treated stone like something alive. It breathes cold, it leaks wind. It remembers winter long after the season has passed. And so, one of the quietest battles in castle life is fought not with fire, but with fabric. You run your hand along a tapestry and feel the difference immediately. The air here is stiller, softer. The wall behind it no longer radiates that sharp, bone-deep chill. A solid historical fact anchors this moment. Tapestries weren't just decoration, they were insulation. Expensive, labour-intensive, and remarkably effective at slowing heat loss. These massive woven scenes, battles, hunts, saints, strange animals that may or may not exist, serve a practical purpose first. They trap a layer of air between cloth and stone, breaking the cold's direct path into the room. The thicker the weave, the warmer the space feels. This is why tapestries cluster in important rooms and sleeping chambers, while lesser corridors remain bare and brutal. A quirky detail hidden in plain sight. Many tapestries are portable. Lords take them from castle to castle, hanging them wherever they stay. Warmth travels with wealth. If you own insulation, you don't leave it behind. This also explains why some castles feel strangely hollow when abandoned. The warmth was never in the walls, but in what was hung upon them. Drafts of the enemy tapestries can't fully defeat. Wind finds cracks in arrow slits, door frames, and floor gaps. So people get creative. Rolled cloth is stuffed into openings. Wooden shutters are reinforced with leather. Curtains hang over doorways like heavy eyelids, forcing cold air to slow down and sink before it reaches the room beyond. You learn to duck through them quickly, pulling the fabric close behind you with practiced care. There's debate among scholars about how widespread these practices were. Some argue insulation like this was limited to elite spaces, leaving most of the castle exposed. Others suggest even modest garrisons used whatever materials they had. Old blankets, sacks, spare clothing, to block drafts. Watching a knight wedge a rolled cloak into a door crack without a second thought, you lean toward the second view. Cold makes everyone inventive. You also notice how rooms are chosen in winter. People abandon large chambers for smaller ones, preferring spaces with fewer exterior walls. Inner rooms, though darker and sometimes damp, hold heat better. This seasonal migration within the castle is subtle but constant. You don't fight the building, you adapt to it. A fringe fact that rarely makes it into textbooks. Some castles used double walls or wall passages that incidentally acted as insulation. While designed for defence or movement, these air gaps reduced heat loss in certain rooms. Whether this was intentional or accidental is still debated. Medieval architecture often stumbles into thermal efficiency without naming it. The smell of fabric is everywhere. Wool, dust, smoke, old dye. It's comforting in a strange way. Bare stone feels hostile, cloth feels human. You start to associate warmth with softness, with textures that absorb sound as well as cold. Rooms with tapestries feel quieter, calmer, more habitable. Sleep comes easier here, but nothing is perfect. Fabric collects moisture, mould, insects. It must be beaten, aired, repaired. In winter, airing is risky. You don't want to expose precious insulation to frost, so people tolerate mustiness. They accept a little decay in exchange for a little warmth. Comfort is always a compromise. As you settle into a smaller chamber lined with hangings, the difference is unmistakable. It's still cold, but it's survivable, manageable. The kind of cold you can live with if you have to, and that's the pattern you're starting to see everywhere. Knights don't eliminate winter from castle life. They carve out pockets of resistance. Fabric against stone, body against body, fire against air. Nothing total, nothing permanent. You sit back, wrapped in layers, back against a tapestry that tells a story of summer hunts and green forests, and you understand the quiet genius of it. When you can't change the world, you soften it. Night changes everything. The castle that feels merely uncomfortable by day becomes actively hostile after sunset. Fires are reduced, movement slows, the cold no longer. Distracted settles in with intent. This is when you learn how nights actually sleep, and how much of staying warm depends on surrendering personal space. You're led into a sleeping chamber, and the first thing you notice is how crowded it is. Privacy is a luxury reserved for the highest ranks. Most knights sleep in shared rooms, sometimes dozens together, bodies arranged like tools on a rack. A clear historical fact anchors this scene. Communal sleeping was common in medieval castles, not just for security, but for warmth. Humans are efficient heat sources. The beds themselves are simple frames filled with straw, hay, or reeds. Over time, the filling compresses, creating hollows shaped by bodies. It smells earthy, slightly sweet, and faintly sour. The straw insulates from the stone floor and traps warmth, though it must be replaced periodically. In winter, replacements are delayed. Cold makes everyone less eager to disturb what little comfort they have. You climb in fully clothed. Everyone does. Undressing is unthinkable unless you're ill or extremely privileged. Wool stays on, hoods stay up, belts loosen, but layers remain. Blankets, wool again, are piled on top, sometimes shared. Two knights might sleep under one covering, not out of intimacy, but efficiency. A quirky, almost endearing detail. People wear sleeping caps. Heat loss through the head is obvious even without scientific explanation. Caps are pulled low over ears, sometimes tied under the chin. If you forget yours, you'll know it by morning. There's a scholarly debate about whether medieval people slept fully flat or partially upright, propped on bolsters. Some argue this was for health reasons tied to humoral theory. Others suggest it was simply warmer, keeping the chest elevated and reducing drafts. Lying here, half sitting, half curled, you suspect warmth had more to do with it than theory. The room fills with sound, breathing, coughing, the occasional muttered curse as someone shifts and steals more blanket. The air is thick, but warmer than anywhere else you've been. Body heat accumulates, slowly pushing back the cold. It's not comfortable, but it's effective. You notice how people arrange themselves instinctively. The youngest or lowest ranked often end up on the edges, closer to walls and drafts. Veterans gravitate toward the centre. Status again maps neatly onto temperature. No one needs to explain it. Everyone feels it. Animals sometimes share these spaces. Dogs curl at feet. Cats seek laps or chests. In smaller castles or during harsh winters, even chickens or goats might be sheltered nearby, separated by little more than a wooden barrier. A fringe historical detail surfaces here. Livestock inside human spaces wasn't just convenience, it was heating. Animals add warmth, noise and smell, all of which signal life in a frozen night. Sleep comes in stretches. You wake often, shifting to keep circulation going. Cold makes you restless. Yet, exhaustion wins eventually. When you drift off, it's not into deep, luxurious sleep, but into something lighter, alert, ready to wake if the room grows too cold or too quiet. Morning is the hardest part. Leaving the warmth of shared beds feels like punishment. You delay it as long as you can, knowing the moment you stand, the cold will rush back in. Everyone lingers, stretching slowly, bracing themselves. As you finally rise, you understand something deeply. Warmth here is communal, negotiated, temporary. Sleep is not escape, it's endurance. Knights don't dream of comfort, they dream of getting through the night. And somehow, night after night, they do. Armour waits for you in the corner, silent and patient, and in winter it feels less like protection and more like a threat. You run a hand over a breastplate and flinch. The metal is viciously cold, the kind of cold that bites back. Even touching it leaches heat from your skin. A firm historical fact grounds this moment. Knights did not wear full armour casually or continuously, especially in winter. It was reserved for training, guard duty, or imminent danger, because metal is an efficient conductor of heat. Away from you. Chainmail is worse in some ways. Each link is a tiny cold ring, multiplying the effect across your body. If worn without adequate padding, it can chill you to the core in minutes. That's why the gambeson, the quilted underarmour, is essential. Thick, stuffed and surprisingly warm, it acts as both cushion and insulation. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about how thick these gambesons were in daily use, but no one disputes their thermal importance. A quirky detail you hear whispered among the men. Some knights sleep with their gambesons nearby, even using them as blankets on especially cold nights. Whether this was common practice or a desperate improvisation is unclear, but it speaks volumes about how valuable padded clothing was when temperatures dropped. Putting armour on in winter is an ordeal. Straps are stiff, buckles numb your fingers, metal clasps feel like ice against skin. Some castles try to store armour near hearths to take the edge off the cold, but this is risky. Too much heat can warp leather or dry it out. Still, a slightly warm breastplate is worth the gamble. No one wants to march into a frozen courtyard with frost already blooming across their chest. There's debate among historians about whether knights experienced higher rates of cold-related illness during winter campaigns. Some argue layered armour and constant movement kept them warm enough. Others point to accounts of numbness, frostbite, and slowed reactions. You imagine standing watch in armour as snow drifts sideways, and you don't need the footnotes to pick a side. Armour also traps moisture. Sweat from exertion has nowhere to go, especially beneath metal. Once you stop moving, that moisture turns against you, stealing heat rapidly. This makes pacing essential. Knights learn to move just enough to stay warm without soaking their padding. It's a balance learned through misery. You notice that winter alters tactics. Patrols are shorter. Training is adjusted. No one wants men exhausted and half frozen before a real threat appears. Even tournaments and drills are scaled back. The cold enforces a slower rhythm on martial life, reminding everyone that nature outranks steel. There's a fringe anecdote in some chronicles suggesting that extreme cold could make armour brittle. Whether this was true or exaggerated, the belief alone mattered. Fear of failing equipment in winter added another layer of anxiety to already harsh conditions. As you step away from the armour, you feel relief. Wool and cloth feel forgiving after metal. You understand now why knights cherish moments out of harness in winter. The battlefield may be dangerous, but the cold is relentless, and armour is an uneasy ally against it. This relationship, between warmth and protection, between comfort and readiness, defines winter knighthood. You can be warm, or you can be armoured, rarely both. And as you move back into the castle's fabric-lined corridors, you're reminded that surviving winter here isn't about heroics. It's about knowing when to wear steel, and when to leave it alone. If the warmth had a heartbeat, it would be in the kitchen. You smell it before you see it. Wood smoke, boiling broth, roasting fat. The kitchen is chaos compared to the rest of the castle, loud and busy, and most importantly, alive with heat. A grounded historical fact sets the scene. Medieval castle kitchens ran almost continuously in winter, not just to feed residents, but because constant cooking was one of the most reliable sources of sustained warmth. You step inside and immediately feel the difference. Fires here aren't symbolic, they're functional. Multiple hearths burn at once, ovens glow, cauldrons simmer. Heat radiates in waves, clinging to you as if reluctant to let go. People linger longer than necessary, inventing small tasks just to justify staying. A quirky detail that rarely gets attention. Kitchen staff often worked in lighter clothing year-round. Not because they were immune to cold, but because this space was genuinely hot, even in winter. Steam condenses on beams, sweat beads on brows. Step outside again, and the contrast is brutal. The kitchen's location matters. In many castles, it's placed slightly apart from main living quarters to reduce fire risk. That separation means its warmth doesn't spread far. Still, adjacent rooms, pantries, servants' areas, sometimes even corridors, benefit. These become prime winter real estate. People gravitate toward them unconsciously, orbiting the heat. There's an ongoing debate among historians about how much intentional heat management existed in castle design. Some argue kitchens were isolated with little thought to warming living spaces. Others point to examples where kitchens were deliberately positioned to share walls with halls or chambers, maximising passive heat transfer. Standing here, feeling the warmth bleed into nearby stone, you suspect at least some builders noticed the effect. Food itself becomes thermal strategy. Winter dishes are thick, hot, and filling. Stews, porridges, meat cooked long and slow. Calories are fuel, fat is prized. Hot drinks, broth, ale, warmed with spices, are as much about temperature as taste. You cradle a bowl not just to eat, but to warm your hands. The kitchen also hosts a quieter kind of social mixing. Knights, servants, cooks. Rank blurs slightly here because everyone wants the same thing. Warmth flattens hierarchy, at least for a few minutes. No one stays long enough to challenge order, but the shared comfort is noticeable. A fringe fact slips in through the steam. In some regions, heated stones from ovens are wrapped in cloth and carried to other rooms, even beds, as primitive hot water bottles. Whether widespread or occasional is debated, but the practice appears often enough in records to suggest it worked. You imagine the relief of sliding one into cold bedding, and it makes perfect sense. Eventually you have to leave. Kitchens are busy, and warmth must be shared. As you step back into the cooler corridor, the heat fades quickly, but not completely. You carry it with you for a few minutes, like a memory. You realise now why people schedule chores near cooking times, why conversations drift toward the kitchen door, why winter life seems to pulse around meal preparation. Fire plus food equals survival, and as you move on, slightly warmer than before, you understand something simple and profound. In a frozen castle, the kitchen isn't just where meals are made, it's where winter is held at bay, one pot at a time. Warmth doesn't always come from fire. Sometimes it comes from a cup pressed between your hands, steam curling upward, carrying comfort with it. In winter, drink becomes strategy. You notice it immediately. People here are almost always sipping something. Ale is the constant. A solid historical fact settles in. Medieval ale was weaker than modern beer and consumed daily, partly because it was safer than water, and partly because it provided calories and warmth. It's often served slightly warmed in winter, not hot, but enough to take the edge off the cold. The first swallow spreads through your chest like a small brave flame. Wine appears too, especially for higher ranks, sometimes mulled with spices. Spices are expensive, imported, and symbolic of status, but they also make you feel warmer. Whether they truly raise body temperature or just trick your senses is an open scholarly debate. Medieval people believed strongly in the warming properties of certain ingredients, cinnamon, cloves, ginger, assigned hot qualities in humoral theory. Modern science might argue nuance, but the comfort is undeniable. A quirky detail that surprises you: even water is sometimes warmed. Cold water in winter can shock the system, and there's a belief it invites illness. So water is taken from the fire or mixed with hot liquid. Nothing is consumed straight from icy wells if it can be helped. You notice how drinking is woven into daily rhythm. Morning ale, midday ale, evening ale. Not drunkenness, though that happens, but maintenance. A steady intake of warm liquid keeps fingers flexible, spirits steady, and bodies fueled. Refusing a drink in winter looks less like discipline and more like foolishness. There's a debate among historians about how much alcohol actually helped versus hurt. Alcohol dilates blood vessels, creating a sensation of warmth while increasing heat loss. Some argue this made medieval drinking counterproductive in cold weather. Others point out that the calories, warmth of the liquid and morale boost outweighed the downsides in a world without better options. Sitting here, feeling your chest loosen after a warm swallow, you understand why the debate never quite settles. Communal drinking also changes the atmosphere. People linger, stories stretch longer, laughter comes easier. The cold feels less personal when everyone is facing it together. Cups are shared, passed hand to hand, warming not just bodies, but social bonds. A fringe anecdote drifts through conversation. Some knights add a splash of spirits to their drink before night watch, not enough to dull senses, but enough to steady nerves and blunt the cold. Whether commanders approved is another matter entirely. Survival often operates in the space between rules. You finish your cup slowly, savouring the heat while it lasts. Like firelight, it fades, but it leaves a trace. You feel better prepared to step back into the chill. By now, it's clear that staying warm here isn't about one solution. It's layers of tactics: cloth, fire, food, drink, people. Each alone is insufficient. Together they form a fragile system that holds winter at arm's length. You hand the cup back, flex your fingers, and move on, carrying the warmth inside you for as long as it will stay. By now, you've noticed something subtle. Two people can stand in the same freezing corridor, wearing similar clothes, exposed to the same draft, and one will complain bitterly while the other shrugs and carries on. That difference matters here. In a castle, mindset is insulation. A grounded historical fact frames this. Medieval writings frequently link moral strength, discipline, and endurance with physical resilience. Enduring cold wasn't just unavoidable, it was virtuous. Knights were raised to believe discomfort was shaping them into something better, harder, more worthy. You feel this attitude everywhere. Complaining is tolerated briefly, then mocked. Jokes about frozen toes and icy beds circulate not to deny the cold, but to domesticate it. Humour turns winter from an enemy into a shared nuisance. You start to understand why sarcasm survives so well here. It's psychological warmth. There's an open scholarly debate about how much medieval people truly acclimatized to cold versus simply accepting it. Some historians argue constant exposure lowered sensitivity over time. Others point out that letters and chronicles are full of winter misery, suggesting no amount of mindset erased suffering. Standing here, teeth clenched, you suspect acceptance doesn't mean comfort. It means functionality. Routine becomes another mental shield. You do the same tasks at the same times, regardless of temperature. Predictability anchors you. When you know the day's shape, the cold feels less chaotic. Winter days are shorter, but more structured, packing activity into daylight to avoid unnecessary movement at night. Faith plays a role too. Cold is interpreted as a trial, a reminder of human weakness and divine order. Enduring it patiently earns moral credit. Whether or not you believe this, the belief itself has power. It gives suffering context, which makes it easier to bear. A quirky detail you overhear: some knights refuse extra layers even when available, treating cold tolerance as a point of pride. This isn't universal. Many think it's foolish, but it exists. Endurance becomes identity. Where comfort is scarce, toughness becomes currency. You notice how people move differently in winter. Economical, deliberate, no wasted gestures. The cold trains efficiency. You learn quickly that rushing leads to sweat, and sweat leads to worse cold later. So you pace yourself, breathe steadily, conserve. There's also a collective understanding of limits. If someone is shaking too badly, they're pulled closer to fire or people without comment. Strength here includes knowing when someone else has reached theirs. Survival is communal, not individualistic. As night approaches again, you feel less shocked by the cold than you did before. It hasn't changed, but you have. You know where to stand, when to move, how to layer your day as well as your clothes. The castle hasn't become warmer, you've become better at living inside it, and that realization, quiet and practical, may be the most effective defense of all. You hear them before you see them. A low shuffle, the scrape of hooves, the soft, impatient sound of breathing that isn't human. In winter, the boundary between people and animals inside a castle becomes flexible. A solid historical fact grounds this moment. Medieval castles often housed animals within their walls during winter, both for protection and practicality. Stables might be attached to living quarters, or livestock kept in lower halls, basements, or adjacent structures. This wasn't quaint, it was thermal. Animals produce heat. A lot of it. A single cow can raise the temperature of a small enclosed space noticeably. Even smaller animals, goats, sheep, pigs, add warmth simply by existing. You feel it immediately when you step near them. The air is thicker, heavier, alive. A quirky detail that rarely gets highlighted: people sometimes sleep above stables on purpose. The rising heat seeps through floorboards, turning upper rooms into some of the warmest sleeping spaces in the castle. The smell is the trade-off. In winter, warmth wins. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about how intentional this practice was. Some historians argue animals were placed wherever space allowed, and warmth was a fortunate side effect. Others point to architectural layouts suggesting deliberate stacking. Animals below, humans above. Standing here, feeling the difference in temperature with your own skin, you suspect intention crept in wherever experience proved the benefit. The noise is constant, hooves shifting, straw rustling, occasional snorts and low cries. It's not peaceful, but it's comforting in a way. Silence in winter can mean death. Sound means life is still moving. Animals are also brought inside for security. Frozen ground makes feeding harder, predators bolder. Keeping livestock close means better survival rates and easier access to food. Winter isn't the season for wasteful distance. You notice how people interact with the animals differently now. There's less separation, less squeamishness. A dog curls against a knight's legs without comment. A cat claims a warm lap like it's always belonged there. Even large animals are treated with a kind of resigned gratitude. They are heaters with hearts. A fringe historical note drifts through your thoughts. In some regions, people believed animals could sense cold-related illness before humans did. If animals clustered unusually close or grew restless, it was taken as a warning. Whether superstition or observation, it reinforced the sense that warmth and life were shared concerns. Of course, animals bring problems, filth, disease, parasites. In summer, this would be unacceptable. In winter, the calculus changes. Cold suppresses some pests, and survival outweighs cleanliness. You adapt your standards quickly when your toes are numb. As you move away, back into human spaces, the temperature drops again. You feel the loss immediately. The animal's warmth doesn't follow you, but the lesson does. In a frozen castle, heat comes from bodies as much as fire. Human, animal, it barely matters. What matters is proximity. And you begin to understand that medieval warmth isn't just engineered, it's shared. By now, it's obvious the castle is not on your side. Every design choice whispers the same message. This place was built for war. Comfort was, at best, an afterthought. You feel it in the narrow windows, the towering walls, the exposed heights that funnel wind like a weapon. A clear historical fact anchors this realization. Medieval castles prioritized defense above all else. Thick stone walls, high ceilings, minimal openings, features that actively work against heat retention. The cold isn't a flaw, it's collateral damage. Arrow slits are the perfect example. From the outside, they look small and harmless. Inside, they widen dramatically, creating funnels for light and air. In winter, they become wind knives. Cloth coverings help, shutters help, but nothing seals them completely. Defense demands compromise, and warmth loses that argument every time. There's a long-standing scholarly debate about whether castle builders could have made structures warmer without sacrificing security. Some argue improvements were possible but too costly or untested. Others believe any significant thermal change would weaken defences. Standing here, feeling the draft curl around your ankles, you suspect no lord wanted to gamble safety for comfort. Ceilings soar overhead, designed to intimidate visitors and disperse smoke, but heat rises, always. The higher the ceiling, the colder the floor. You understand now why medieval people rarely tried to heat entire rooms. It was wasted effort. Walls are thick, yes, but stone is a poor insulator. It stores cold and releases it slowly like a seasonal curse. Even when fires burn all day, the walls never quite catch up. You're not warming a room. You're negotiating with centuries of thermal inertia. A quirky architectural detail. Spiral staircases often turn clockwise, giving defenders an advantage. In winter, they also trap cold air in their lower turns. Descending them feels like stepping into a well of frost. No one mentions this benefit in military treatises, but you feel it keenly. You notice how castle life adapts. People avoid certain areas entirely in winter: outer towers, high battlements, large unused chambers. These spaces go dormant, like limbs pulled close to the body. The inhabited castle shrinks inward. Some historians debate whether castles were even meant to be lived in year-round. Were they seasonal strongholds, abandoned for warmer residences when possible? evidence suggests many lords did exactly that, leaving only skeleton crews behind in winter. Those who stayed were the ones best at enduring cold. As you walk through unused rooms, your footsteps echo, and the cold feels heavier here, undisturbed. You realise something sobering. Castles don't resist winter. They amplify it. They turn cold into a defensive ally. And yet, people lived here, loved here, slept and laughed and aged within these walls. That's the marvel, not the stone, but the stubbornness of life inside it. Winter is not the same everywhere. You feel that truth as stories drift through the castle. Tales from knights who've served in other lands, other fortresses, other kinds of cold. The chill in England is damp and clinging. In the Alps it's sharp and dry. In Eastern Europe it can be brutal, endless, and unforgiving. A grounded historical fact sets the frame. Medieval Europe experienced significant regional climate variation, and knights adapted their clothing, architecture, and routines accordingly. There was no single castle winter. There were many. In England and northern France, dampness is the enemy. Cold seeps into everything. Wool stays wet. Stone sweats. Here, knights favour heavy cloaks, layered hoods, and constant fire use, even if it barely helps. Tapestries are everywhere, fighting moisture as much as temperature. Move east, and the cold changes character. Winters are longer, drier, and colder. Snow insulates the ground, but freezes solid. In these regions, furs become essential, not decorative. Boots are thicker, lined heavily. Wooden buildings sometimes outperform stone for warmth, leading to hybrid constructions. Stone for defence, wood for living. There's debate among historians about whether eastern and northern knights were better adapted to extreme cold or simply more accustomed to suffering it. Some evidence suggests more advanced use of layered furs and insulated clothing. Others argue survival rates were no better, just differently documented. Either way, the adaptations are visible. In southern Europe, the challenge shifts. Cold exists, but it's shorter-lived. Castles there often feel shockingly cold in winter, because they're built to shed heat in summer. Thin walls, open layouts, ventilation everywhere. When winter arrives, those same features become liabilities. People there rely more on braziers, portable heat sources, than massive hearths. A quirky regional detail. In parts of Italy and Spain, people use foot warmers, small metal or ceramic containers filled with embers, tucked beneath tables or skirts. These localised solutions show up less in northern castles, where open flames are preferred. Different problems, different answers. You notice how accents carry climate with them. A knight from the north talks about winter like an old rival. One from the south treats it as an inconvenience, something to be endured briefly, then forgotten. Both suffer, but differently. Castles themselves reflect this diversity. Roof pitches vary for snow. Window sizes change. Even floor materials differ. No single blueprint rules medieval warmth. Instead, there's a patchwork of solutions shaped by geography and experience. As you listen, you realise something comforting. No matter where they came from, everyone agrees on one thing. Winter in a castle is hard. The details change. The cold does not. You start noticing collars. Not faces first. Collars. Thick, plush, sometimes absurdly luxurious collars framing necks and chins. In winter, furs announce themselves long before voices do. They are warmth, status, and survival woven into one. A clear historical fact anchors this. Fur was one of the most effective insulators available in the medieval world, and its use was tightly regulated by wealth, trade access, and sumptuary laws. Not all furs were equal, and not everyone was allowed to wear them. You run your fingers along one as you pass. A lining of squirrel fur, soft and dense. Squirrel is common, surprisingly, especially in northern regions, is warm, light, and widely traded. Fox and marten appear too, richer, heavier. Ermine, white and unmistakable, is reserved for the very top. Warmth here is hierarchy made visible. A quirky detail hidden in the margins of history. Fur garments are often reversible. Hide the fur inside for subtle warmth, or turn it outward to display status? Practicality and vanity share the same seam. There's ongoing scholarly debate about how widespread fur use really was among knights. Some argue it was limited to elites and ceremonial clothing. Others point to inventories and wills listing fur-lined everyday garments, suggesting practical use was more common than art implies. Watching how people cling to these collars in the cold, you lean toward practicality winning more often than paintings admit. Furs concentrate heat where it matters: neck, chest, back. Protect the core, and extremities survive longer. Knights know this intuitively. A fur-lined cloak can mean the difference between shivering constantly and functioning. But furs bring complications. They're heavy when wet. They require care. Parasites love them. In winter, these downsides are tolerated. In summer, they disappear entirely. Seasonal wardrobes aren't luxury. They're necessity. You also notice how furs move. They don't flutter like wool. They hang thick and still, blocking wind. In narrow corridors and on battlements that matters. Cold air loses momentum when it hits fur. It's physics before physics has a name. A fringe historical note. Some people believe certain furs carry medicinal or spiritual properties. Wolf fur for strength, bear for endurance. Whether superstition or symbolism, it reinforces the idea that wearing warmth is also wearing protection. As you adjust your own imagined collar, you feel how much difference it makes. The cold no longer bites your throat. Breathing feels easier. Small changes matter here, and you understand now why fur isn't just decoration in medieval winter life. It's portable shelter. It's privilege you can wrap around yourself. In a frozen castle, that kind of advantage shows immediately. The warmest rooms aren't always where you expect them. You discover this the moment you step into a space shaped not by warfare, but by routine. Rooms influenced by monastic life. Chapels, scriptoria and chambers shared with or inspired by religious communities carry a different rhythm, and sometimes better strategies for enduring cold. A grounded historical fact sets the tone. Monasteries and religious houses developed some of the most organised daily routines in medieval Europe, and their approaches to heating and winter living often influenced nearby castles. Knights noticed what worked. Monks didn't have more firewood, they had discipline. Strict schedules meant predictable use of space. Fires were lit at specific times, meals at fixed hours, sleep coordinated. This consistency allowed heat to be used efficiently, even if modestly. Castles borrowing these ideas began to cluster activities into fewer rooms during winter, abandoning excess space. You notice chapels are often smaller than great halls, easier to warm. Candles burn constantly, adding tiny but cumulative heat. Bodies gather close. Stone is still cold, but the scale is manageable. Prayer, like warmth, works better in groups. There's debate among historians about whether monastic heating techniques were deliberately copied by secular lords or simply observed and adopted over time. Some point to shared craftsmen and builders. Others argue imitation happened informally, through proximity and example. Standing here, feeling the relative comfort, you suspect good ideas spread without needing permission. A quirky detail surfaces in quieter corners. Monks sometimes warmed ink or parchment before writing, to prevent cracking and improve flow. The byproduct? Slightly warmer hands, slightly warmer rooms. Knowledge production literally generated heat, however minor. You also notice how silence helps. Less movement means less sweating, which means less subsequent chill. Monastic calm isn't just spiritual, it's thermally efficient. Knights, less inclined to silence, still learn to lower their energy in winter. Some castles even house resident clergy, and their quarters reflect this influence. Smaller, well-used, insulated with books, hangings, and habit. Books themselves, stacked in shelves, act as insulation, thickening walls with paper and leather. A fringe historical thought lingers. The rule of fasting in winter wasn't just spiritual, it conserved fuel and labour. Less cooking, fewer fires. Whether intentional or not, it shaped how communities endured cold. As you step back into the more martial parts of the castle, you carry this lesson with you. Warmth isn't always about adding more fire. Sometimes it's about order, about knowing when and where to exist. In winter, chaos leaks heat. Structure holds it. Cold doesn't just attack comfort, it attacks routine. You learn this the hard way when water becomes the problem of the day. Wells freeze, buckets ice over, channels stiffen and slow. A grounded historical fact settles in. Winter disrupted medieval water access so severely that castles often altered daily schedules just to secure usable water before it locked itself away. You approach the well and feel the air change. Colder, damper, heavier. Ice rims the stone. Someone has broken a thin skin of frost already, and the bucket comes up sluggish, rimmed with slush. Every draw is labour now. Water that once flowed easily has to be fought for. There's debate among historians about how frequently wells froze solid. Some argue depth protected them. Others point to records of winter shortages and emergency measures. Standing here, watching men take turns hacking ice away with wooden mallets, you don't doubt it happened often enough to matter. Water is warmed, whenever possible. Cold water shocks the body, stiffens joints, and is believed to cause illness. So water is carried to kitchens mixed with hot broth, or left near hearths to take the edge off. Nothing is wasted. Spills occur softly. Sanitation suffers. Latrines freeze. Waste piles up faster than it can be removed. In some castles, designated winter latrines are placed closer to living quarters, sacrificing comfort for safety. A fringe historical detail surfaces here. Some guardrobes are built along exterior walls so waste drops away from the castle. But in winter, frozen build-up becomes a serious hazard. Cold solves one problem and creates another. Bathing all but disappears, not because people dislike cleanliness, but because wet skin in winter is dangerous. Instead, bodies are wiped down with cloths, linen changed when possible. Smell becomes background noise. Survival outranks freshness. You notice how everything slows. Tasks are grouped. Trips are minimised. If you're going to the well, you take several containers. If you're heating water, you heat a lot. Efficiency isn't abstract. It's warmth conserved. There's a psychological weight to frozen water too. Flow means life. Stillness feels ominous. People watch ice carefully, noting cracks and changes, reading it like a mood. When thaw finally comes, it's celebrated quietly, with relief more than joy. As you pull your hands back into your sleeves, fingers aching, you understand that winter here isn't just cold air. It's frozen systems. Every routine becomes fragile, and staying warm means keeping life moving, even when water itself wants to stop. Not all warmth announces itself. Some of it hides behind doors you're not meant to open, in spaces that don't feature in songs or stories. You notice it when you pass through a corridor and feel, briefly, a pocket of softer air, the women's quarters. A grounded historical fact sets this gently. In many medieval castles, women's chambers were smaller, more enclosed, and more carefully insulated than the large public spaces used by knights. Privacy and warmth overlapped more often than in male-dominated areas. You step inside one such room, and the difference is immediate. Lower ceilings, fewer exterior walls, heavier hangings. The air feels held, not constantly escaping. Fires are smaller but more effective here, their heat staying where it's needed. There's debate among historians about whether this was intentional design or a social consequence. Some argue women were deliberately given warmer spaces due to perceived fragility. Others suggest these rooms were simply better for daily tasks like sewing, childcare and record keeping, which required stable environments. Either way, the result is warmth. A quirky detail you notice. Beds here are often deeper, with curtains on all sides. Bed hangings create a microclimate, trapping body heat through the night. It's not luxurious, it's practical. Men use these too when available, but women rely on them more consistently. Textiles dominate these rooms. Spinning, weaving, mending all generate heat, however slight. More importantly, they produce more fabric, more insulation, more ways to fight the cold. Warmth is literally made here, thread by thread. You also sense a different pace, less rushing, less unnecessary movement. Calm preserves heat. Conversation is quieter, laughter softer. These rooms feel lived in rather than endured. A fringe historical thought drifts in. Some scholars suggest women's spaces preserved older heating traditions longer, while male spaces prioritised martial display over comfort. Whether true or not, the contrast is striking. As you leave, the cold feels sharper again. The difference lingers, teaching you something important. Warmth in a medieval castle isn't evenly distributed. It follows power, purpose, and habit. And sometimes, it hides in the places history talks about the least. By now, you've absorbed a lot of quiet truths about medieval cold, and that's exactly where the myths start to fall apart. You've heard them before. Castles were cosy once the fire was lit. Stone walls kept heat in. Medieval people didn't mind the cold. Standing here, wrapped in layers, breath faintly fogging the air, you know better. A grounded historical fact clears the fog immediately. Stone is a poor insulator. Thick walls slow temperature change, but they do not trap heat. They store cold just as faithfully as they store warmth. The idea of castles as naturally snug is a modern misunderstanding, born from fireplaces and fantasy. One persistent myth claims that medieval builders didn't know how to make buildings warm. That's not quite true. They knew some things. Fabric insulates, smaller rooms are warmer, bodies generate heat. What they didn't have were chimneys that circulated air efficiently, glass that sealed tightly, or fuels cheap enough to burn constantly. Knowledge existed, technology lagged. Another misconception is that fires burned all the time. In reality, fuel was precious. Fires were lit when needed and banked when not. Letting a hearth roar unchecked wasn't indulgence. It was wasteful and sometimes dangerous. If you imagine castles glowing warmly through winter nights, you're imagining a fuel budget no medieval lord could afford. There's an open scholarly debate about whether castles were ever intended to be primary residences year-round. Some argue they were symbolic and defensive hubs, meant to be occupied intermittently. Others point to extensive domestic infrastructure suggesting long-term habitation. Walking through cold, half-abandoned chambers, you start to see how both could be true. Castles were lived in, but selectively, seasonally, strategically. A quirky myth you overhear mocked quietly by the veterans, that straw floors and rushes made spaces warm and comfortable. In truth, they helped a little, absorbing moisture, softening stone, but they also hid rot, insects, and filth. They were a compromise, not a comfort. Another false belief dissolves as you watch daily life. Medieval people did not tough it out without complaint. They complained constantly. Letters, chronicles, and records are full of grievances about cold, damp, smoke, and misery. Endurance didn't mean silence. It meant persistence. You also realise castles weren't uniformly cold. Some rooms were tolerable, a few were almost pleasant. Warmth existed, but it was uneven, contested, and temporary. The myth of the castle as either freezing dungeon or roaring hearth misses the truth in between. As you move through these spaces with clearer eyes, the romance fades, but something more interesting replaces it. Ingenuity, adaptation, 1,000 small decisions made every day to survive another winter night. The real story isn't that medieval castles were warm, it's that people learned how to live in places that weren't. Cold doesn't just make you uncomfortable. In this world, it makes you sick. Or at least, everyone believes it does. And belief shapes behaviour just as strongly as truth. A grounded historical fact frames this. Medieval medicine was based on humoral theory, which held that health depended on the balance of hot, cold, wet and dry qualities within the body. Winter, damp stone and icy air were seen as direct threats to that balance. You feel the consequences everywhere. Drafts are feared, cold floors are avoided, sitting too long without movement is discouraged. People blame aching joints, coughs, fevers, and melancholy on cold exposure, and sometimes they're right. Cold weakens bodies, especially when nutrition dips and sleep is poor. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about how accurate medieval cold-related diagnoses actually were. Some historians argue many winter illnesses attributed to chill were infectious diseases exacerbated by close quarters. Others point out that hypothermia, frostbite, and chronic cold stress were very real and poorly understood. The language was wrong, but the suffering was real. You watch preventative medicine in action. People rub limbs vigorously to restore circulation. They drink warming concoctions, herbs steeped in ale, honeyed wine, spiced broths. Mustard plasters and heated poultices are applied to chests and joints. Whether effective or not, they provide warmth, and that alone helps. A quirky medical detail you overhear. Some physicians advise against sleeping alone in winter, claiming shared beds help balance humours. It's science by instinct, wrapped in theory. Warmth heals, therefore warmth must be health. You also notice how illness changes the castle's thermal geography. The sick are moved closer to fires. Extra blankets appear. Windows are sealed more carefully. Cold becomes an enemy to be actively repelled, not just endured. Death in winter carries a different weight. Frozen ground delays. Burial. Bodies are kept longer indoors, wrapped and guarded. The cold slows decay but deepens grief. Winter feels heavier because it refuses to let go. As you pass through a chamber where someone coughs softly under layers of wool, you understand how intimately linked cold and fear are here. Every draught is suspicious. Every chill feels personal. Staying warm isn't just about comfort. It's about staying alive. Night watch in winter is where all illusions die. There's no fire here, no tapestry, no shared bed or steaming cup. Just you, the wall, and the wind. A clear historical fact grounds the moment. Medieval castles were guarded around the clock year-round, regardless of weather. Winter didn't pause defence. It made it more necessary. Attacks favoured hardship. When enemies were tired, supplies low, and vigilance strained. You climb the steps slowly, each one colder than the last. Stone pulls heat from your boots. The higher you go, the sharper the wind becomes. By the time you reach the battlements, it feels like the night itself is breathing against your face. Armour is minimal, mail or a padded coat at most. Full plate would freeze you solid. Cloak pulled tight, hood cinched. Still, the cold finds you. It always does. There's debate among historians about how long winter watches lasted. Some suggest shorter shifts rotated more frequently. Others argue manpower shortages forced longer stints. Standing here, fingers aching despite gloves, you hope the first group is right. You learn the tricks quickly. Keep moving, but not too much. Stamp feet gently. Flex fingers inside sleeves. Face away from the wind when possible. Watch the stars. Not for beauty, but because looking up keeps your blood moving. A quirky, almost grim detail. Some guards urinate on their hands briefly to restore warmth. It works, for a moment. No one brags about it. Survival doesn't care about dignity. Sound behaves differently in cold. It carries farther, cracks sharper. You listen more than you look. Winter sharpens senses because it has to. The worst enemy isn't fear, it's stillness. Stillness leads to numbness, numbness to mistakes. You fight it quietly, shifting weight, breathing steadily, counting time in heartbeats. When relief finally comes, you almost don't feel it. You descend stiffly, limbs slow to obey. Inside, near a fire, the pain blooms as circulation returns. It's brutal. And welcome. Pain means you're still here. Night watch teaches the clearest lesson of all. Warmth in a medieval castle is never guaranteed. It's earned, moment by frozen moment. Winter doesn't relent, but it does pause. You feel it during feasts, when the castle briefly leans into excess as a defence against the cold. Long tables fill again. Fires burn a little higher than usual. For a few hours, survival gives way to celebration. A grounded historical fact sets the scene. Medieval winter festivals, especially around Christmas and midwinter, were deliberately timed to boost morale, redistribute food, and strengthen social bonds during the hardest season. They weren't indulgent accidents. They were strategy. The Great Hall looks different tonight. More candles, more bodies, more noise. Heat accumulates not because the architecture has changed, but because people refuse to let the cold dominate the moment. You feel it in the press of shoulders, the laughter that comes easier after warm food and drink. Food is richer now. Meat preserved since autumn is finally eaten. Fatty dishes dominate. Spices appear again. Every bite is energy stored against the coming days. You eat more than usual and no one comments. Winter rewards fullness. There's an open debate among historians about whether feasts significantly improved physical health or merely lifted spirits. Some argue the caloric surge mattered. Others suggest the psychological relief was the real benefit. Sitting here, warmth blooming in your chest, you suspect the two are inseparable. A quirky, festive detail surfaces. Games are encouraged not just for fun, but to generate heat. Dancing, wrestling, mock combat. Movement becomes celebration. Even solemn knights find excuses to stay active. For a moment the castle feels almost warm, almost human. The cold doesn't disappear, but it steps back, waiting its turn. Then the fires are banked, tables cleared. People drift away, carrying warmth inside them like contraband. The pause ends, winter resumes, but something has shifted. You're reminded that endurance isn't only about suffering. It's also about remembering why you're enduring. And that memory burns longer than any fire. Winter forces invention, even in a world that changes slowly. You start noticing small experiments scattered through the castle, quiet attempts to improve comfort without undermining defence. None of them revolutionise life here, but each nudges it slightly away from misery. A grounded historical fact anchors this. Before the Renaissance, medieval builders and occupants did experiment with heating improvements. Better chimney shapes, movable braziers, layered flooring and more strategic room use, even if progress was incremental. You pass a brazier glowing softly in a smaller chamber. Portable heat. Dangerous, smoky but flexible. In winter, flexibility matters. Braziers are placed under tables near beds, moved where needed. They don't heat rooms, they heat people. That's enough. There's debate among historians about how common braziers really were in northern castles due to fire risk. Some argue they were rare outside southern Europe. Others suggest winter desperation overrode caution. The scorch marks you see on stone floors suggest usage was more than theoretical. You notice improved chimneys too, narrower throats, angled flues, designed to draw smoke upward more effectively. These are early steps toward controlling airflow, even if the science isn't formalised yet. Trial and error leaves its signature in soot. A quirky fringe detail. Some floors are layered with wood atop stone, creating an insulating break. It's subtle, but you feel it underfoot. Someone noticed that direct contact with stone was the problem and acted accordingly. Rooms are rearranged seasonally. Furniture clusters around heat sources. Drafty areas are blocked off. Doors are weighted or sealed with cloth. None of this appears in chronicles. It's lived knowledge. You realise innovation here doesn't look like invention. It looks like habit. Adjustments passed along quietly, copied because they worked. Winter doesn't spark breakthroughs. It sharpens attention. And as you walk on, you feel the accumulated wisdom of generations pressing gently against the cold, refusing to surrender entirely. Eventually the cold wins, not over people, but over places. You feel it in the silence of unused corridors, the way certain towers sit dark all winter, abandoned to wind and frost. Castles don't fail dramatically, they empty slowly. A grounded historical fact frames this shift. Many medieval castles were partially or fully abandoned during harsh winters, especially as political stability improved and alternative residences became available. Cold was a major factor in that decision. Lords with options left. Manor houses, though less defensible, were often warmer, with smaller rooms and more wood construction. Castles became symbols, garrisons, or seasonal refuges rather than homes. Those who stayed were soldiers, caretakers, and the stubborn. There's debate among historians about whether cold alone drove this change. Some argue economic shifts and new military technology mattered more. Others point out that comfort increasingly influenced status and lifestyle. Walking through these cold, echoing spaces, you feel how quickly morale could drain away. A quirky detail you notice. Rooms left unused in winter often deteriorate faster. Damp settles in, wood warps, stone cracks. Cold doesn't just chase people away, it damages what's left behind. You imagine generations slowly retreating inward, heating fewer rooms each year, until whole wings fall silent. Not defeat, adaptation. Abandoned doesn't mean forgotten. Castles still matter. They loom, they guard borders, but their role shifts, shaped by the limits of human endurance. As you stand in a tower no one has used all season, frost lining the stones, you understand something quietly profound. Warmth decides where life stays. Cold decides where it leaves. There's a quiet irony waiting for you outside the castle walls. After everything you've endured inside, stone, drafts, endless negotiation with winter, you hear stories that don't quite fit the hierarchy you expect. Stories of peasants, of cottages, of nights that are somehow warmer. A grounded historical fact reframes everything. Many medieval peasant homes were actually warmer than castles in winter, thanks to smaller spaces, lower ceilings and constant domestic fires. Comfort did not always follow power. You picture a peasant cottage, wood and wattle, packed earth floors, a single room shared by family and animals alike. The fire burns in the centre, smoke drifting upward, heat never given the chance to escape far. Bodies cluster, walls flex instead of leaching warmth. It smells strong, but it's warm. Inside a castle, heat is diluted by scale. In a cottage, it concentrates. One hearth heats everything. There are no grand halls to lose warmth to pride. Survival demands efficiency, and efficiency delivers comfort. There's debate among historians about how widespread this warmth advantage really was. Some argue cottages were drafty, smoky, and unhealthy. Others counter that while air quality suffered, temperature stability was better than in stone fortresses. Standing here, remembering how cold your boots felt on castle floors, you understand why this comparison matters. A quirky detail often overlooked. Animals in peasant homes aren't just nearby, they're inside. Cows, goats, pigs, chickens. Their combined body heat transforms small spaces into living furnaces. What castles separate, cottages combine. You also notice how expectations differ. Peasants don't imagine grandeur. They imagine getting through winter. Their homes are built around that goal. Castles are built around power, and power is cold. Knights know this too, even if they don't say it aloud. Some grew up in these cottages before service lifted them into stone walls. They remember nights warmer than any they've spent since gaining status. It's a memory they carry quietly. This realization doesn't diminish the hardship of peasant life. It reframes comfort. Warmth isn't luxury. It's proximity, density, adaptation. As you look back at the castle rising behind you, you see it differently now. Impressive, dominant, and thermally foolish. The cold doesn't care about rank. It rewards whoever builds small and stays close. By the time you reach the end of winter, the cold feels familiar, not friendly, never friendly, but known. You understand its habits now, where it pools, where it retreats, how it can be delayed if not defeated. That understanding is the real legacy of life inside frozen medieval castles. A grounded historical fact anchors this final stretch. Despite their discomfort, castles remained in use for centuries because people adapted their behaviour, expectations and architecture to survive within them. Endurance, not comfort, sustained them. You think back over everything you've learned without being taught. How to dress, where to stand, when to move, who to sit beside. Warmth became something you practiced, not something you possessed. There's an open, scholarly debate about whether medieval people were ultimately more resilient than modern ones. Some argue we've lost tolerance for discomfort. Others point out that we've simply refused to accept unnecessary suffering. Standing here, you see the nuance. Resilience was required because there was no alternative. A quirky final detail lingers. Some nights marked winters by scars from cold, numb patches, stiff joints, fingers that never quite worked the same. These weren't badges of honour, just reminders. Winter left its signature quietly. As the season loosens its grip and thaw begins, stone releases its cold slowly, reluctantly. Fires burn less. Doors open wider. Life expands back into spaces abandoned for months. The castle exhales. You realise something calming. All this effort, all this ingenuity, all this shared endurance. It wasn't about being warm. It was about staying human when the environment made that difficult. And that lesson lasts longer than winter ever did. You step forward, carrying that quiet knowledge with you, ready to rest now, knowing the cold has been faced, understood, and, if only for a while, left behind. Now the story softens and you don't have to hold the cold anymore. You can let your shoulders drop, imagining the castle fading into distance, its stone walls no longer pressing in. The fires are low, The night is calm and winter has nothing left to prove. Breathe slowly, in and out. No drafts here, no watch to keep, no floor stealing warmth from your feet. Think of the generations who endured nights far colder than this, not because they wanted to, but because life asked them to. They learned patience, they learned closeness, they learned how small comforts could mean everything. And now, you don't need to learn those lessons the hard way. You get to listen, to imagine, and then to rest. So let the cold drift away with the story. Let the walls dissolve. Let the fire dim gently, not because it must, but because sleep is warmer than stone ever was.